So let's get to the description part about bones of the vertebral column. The vertebral column, also called the spine, backbone, or spinal column, makes up about 2/5 of the total height of the body and is composed of a series of bones called vertebrae. Remember from my introduction part to bones, I did explain the human vertebrae are bones which are irregular in shape. The vertebral column consists of bone and connective tissue that surrounds and protects the nervous tissue of the spinal cord. And the length of the column is about 71 centimeter, which is equivalent to 28 inches in an average adult male, and about 61 centimeter, which is equivalent to 24 inches in an average adult female. The vertebral column functions as a strong, flexible rod with elements that can move forward, backward, and sideways, and can rotate. It encloses and protects the spinal cord, which is the chief function, supports the head, and serves as a point of attachment for the ribs, pelvic girdle, and muscles of the back and upper limbs. So these are the functions of the vertebral column. The total number of the vertebrae during early development is 33. Of these, 24 are separate and movable, and these are cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae. And the others are variably fused within the pelvis, and these are sacrum and the coccyx. The adult vertebral column typically contains 26 vertebrae, and these are distributed as follows: 7 cervical vertebrae in the neck region, 12 thoracic vertebrae posterior to the thoracic cavity, 5 lumbar vertebrae supporting the back or the lower back, 1 sacrum consisting of 5 fused sacral vertebrae, 1 coccyx consisting of 4 fused coccygeal vertebrae. So this is the distribution of the vertebral or the vertebrae along the vertebral column. For the first, we have the 7 cervical, then 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, 1 sacrum, then finally we have 1 coccyx. For the last two, we've been told they are fused, which sacrum is 5 fused, then coccyx are 4 fused. These are images illustrating the distribution of vertebrae along the vertebral column. And let's check with the first image. We have the lateral view of the vertebral column. And from this first point of reference, we have the cervical vertebrae, which are 5 in number. Then thoracic vertebrae starts from here to here. Then 5 lumbar vertebrae, then sacrum, and finally coccyx. For this other illustration, we have the first 2 cervical vertebrae, which are the atlas and axis. So we have atlas, lateral view, then axis, and then we have typically cervical and thoracic. So still we have the cervical vertebrae, then the thoracic. So briefly, you can as well identify the features of these vertebrae are so different. And with us here again, we have the lumbar vertebrae and the sacrum. This is the superior view of the same images. And we have the first cervical vertebrae, which is the atlas, then the second axis. Then here we have the typical cervical vertebrae, and then we have the thoracic vertebrae, of which the ribs emerge. Then we have the lumbar vertebrae, and finally sacrum. Okay, let's move to another level of description. And we have normal curves of the vertebral column. So when viewed from anterior or posterior, a normal adult vertebral column appears straight, but when viewed from the side, it shows 4 slight bends called normal curves. Relative to the front of the body, the cervical and lumbar vertebrae curves are convex, which means they are bulging out. In the thoracic and sacral vertebrae, they are concave, of which they are cupping in. The curves of the vertebral column increases its strength, help maintain balance in upright position, absorb shocks during walking, and protect the vertebrae from fracture. So these are the functions of the curves of the vertebral column. we've been able to identify cervical and the lumbar vertebrae are convex in an adult vertebrae, then the thoracic and the sacral vertebrae are concave, concave in shape, of which they are cupping in. As well, we've been able to identify the functions, of which we've been told these curves increases its strength, help maintain balance in an upright position, absorb shock during walking, and protect the vertebrae from fracture. Okay, here we have the illustration of these curves. First of all, this is the anterior view of the vertebral column. We have the first 7 cervical vertebrae, the 12 thoracic vertebrae, 5 lumbar vertebrae, then sacrum and coccyx. From this other illustration, which is the lateral view of the vertebral column, you can see the convex cervical vertebrae, then concave thoracic vertebrae from their alignment, then convex lumbar vertebrae, and then concave sacral and coccyx. Let's proceed. In the fetus, there is only a single anteriorly concave curve throughout the length of the entire vertebral column. At about the 3rd month after birth, when an infant begins to hold its head erect, the anteriorly convex cervical curve begins to develop. Later, when the child sits up, stands, and walks, the anteriorly convex lumbar curve begins to develop. So let's check on the fetal distribution of the curves. So let's just proceed so that I can be able to show you these features. The thoracic and sacral curves are called primary curves because they retain the original curvature of the embryonic vertebral column. Then the cervical and lumbar curves are known as secondary curves because they begin to form later, several months after birth. All curves are fully developed by age of 10. However, secondary curves may be progressively lost in old age. Here we have the illustration. First of all, we have one single concave. Then we have the secondary curves which starts to develop. So we have the cervical curves which is represented by 1. Then we have the thoracic represented by 2. Then we have the lumbar represented by 3, which is painted green. Finally, sacrum and coccyx represented by 4. So these are the curves in the fetal development. Then finally, the curves in adult. We can as well identify these vertebrae or the bones. Some features are illustrated here, such as vertebral body, which we'll get to know them. We have the annulus fibrosus of the intervertebral disc. So these are the discs between 2 adjacent vertebrae. Then we have coccyx, sacral curve, 5 fused sacral vertebrae. This is the sacrum, intervertebral foramen. So never get scared because we'll soon get to know them. Successful vertebrae articulate with one another across synovial joints. All movable vertebrae have 2 superior and 2 inferior articular facets. These 4 facets control movement between adjacent vertebrae. Their shapes are the key to the function and identification of different vertebrae. And then individual vertebrae are united within vertebral column by ligament and muscles that hold them in a flexible unit. So this is just but a brief description about the nature of vertebrae or the vertebrae within the vertebral column. Intervertebral disc. From the 2nd cervical vertebrae to the sacrum, structures called intervertebral discs are found between the bodies of the adjacent vertebrae, which we've been able to identify. So they account for 25% of the height of the vertebral column, as well as contributing to the vertebral longitudinal curvature. Each disc has an outer circumferential fibrous ring consisting of fibrocartilage called annulus fibrosus and a senous soft pulpy mucoid substance called the nucleus pulposus. So the outer surface of this intervertebral disc are annulus fibrosus, then the central part is the nucleus pulposus. With increasing age, this watery mucoid region converts to fibrocartilage as it gradually becomes less hydrated. The discs form strong joints, permitting various movement of the vertebral column, and as well absorbs shock or vertical shock. Discs are thickest in the lumbar and cervical regions, where the vertebral column is most freely movable. So let's get to identify this disc of which I've been able to talk with. We have the intervertebral disc right here between two adjacent vertebrae. And for this case, this is the, I can say the thoracic vertebrae, since we have some facets along the transverse processes of which we'll be able to learn. So let's just identify the intervertebral disc located at this point.